Yeah, I
So
think the most frustrating thing, or the thing that frustrates me personally about like cultural appropriation or whatever, is when I see someone post something about like for example Apawang Ud, and then they'll
mm,
be like, "Oh, Filipino," and then all the other Filipinos are like, "Oh yeah, proud to be Filipino here." It's like, okay, but there's like no
mm,
recognition of of who she actually is or whatever. Or like they'll post about like Igorots or whatever, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's so cool to be Filipino." That, like, again, what Gerald was saying about how
mm,
initially there is that frustration where it's like, oh, like what about like what? There's no actual recognition of Filipino.
yeah.
My point is that like the thing about appropriation or whatever is the lack of recognition, and like stuff like that. Because I remember seeing this local, I think, food truck that had a post about their food, and the background was Apawang Ud, and then it was like
Mm.
Filipino food, blah blah blah, and then all in the comments, I wanted to comment. I was like, "Yo, like take this down, man.
It
Y'all are
was
like,
it was
you know exactly what I'm
Yeah,
talking about."
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know what you're
um,
talking about.
yeah.
It wasn't one food truck.
it was a
Uh,
local.
it was
No,
an
it was a food
event.
truck.
It was an event, right?
Okay, yeah, yeah.
It was an
It
event
was
that
an event.
they were putting
Yeah,
together. So the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
promoters or the whoever was in charge of putting it together,
yeah.
yeah, they used
And what if
Apawang
you were
Ud.
her relative and you saw that and be like, that's my Lola. What the heck? I mean, come
Yeah,
on. I
yeah.
mean,
No,
I know.
the thing that frustrated me
Yeah,
was like all in the comments there was everything was like, oh, proud to be Filipino, proud to be Filipino, but no mention of Igorotness. And initially, that's what
Yes,
pissed me
exactly.
off. I was like,
Mm,
man,
mm, mm.
shut this off. But one thing that someone brought up to me when I was discussing like my feelings about this was like, so do you not see yourself as a Filipino or whatever? And the more I think about it, and the fact that I'm talking about it now, it it my frustration does sound like I'm very, what's the word, uh like I'm trying to push myself away from being Filipino or whatever. So
Mm.
her
hmm
question was like, yeah, so do you not see yourself as Filipino? And it kind of took me back, and I was like, oh, good question.
Right, right.
But
I
that is something specific to me because I'm still trying to get into grips of my identity or whatever. Because I told her like
and I,
yeah,
I'm still trying to form my identity
uh-huh.
about being an Igorot or whatever. I'm trying to actualize it. Whereas if I were way more mature about this, then I could have a better answer. But for me initially, it was more so the I was more hung up on the anger part, the emotional part. That
Hmm,
is
hmm.
very that's something that has to be like addressed for me personally, and for someone who might
hmm
have those same feelings, that they should probably like step it back a little bit and think of why that might piss you off or whatever, and
yeah,
not just go on to the not just go to the flow and just be like, oh, cultural appropriation bad, but you also got to like think about it and think about why that might make you angry. So
Well, I think that one thing that's really fascinating is the embrace of that the indigenous, because I think that if you look at how people take in indigenous things, it is looked upon as being quite authentic. I mean, if we looked at this 40,
mhm,
50 years ago, we would have said stuff like, you would have heard all of the wacky stuff like, yeah, that's primitive, that's backwards, and all of that. But now it's looked upon with a certain kind of genuineness that I think is it 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 honors who we are, and yet it's only superficial. I think to me that's where
mm,
we still haven't we haven't crossed that, we haven't broken that ceiling yet. We
mhm,
haven't
mhm,
gotten into the deeper part. Yeah, people know Apawang Ud because of the tattoos and all of that. But that's still just, in many ways that's just superficial for most people.
mhm.
It's there's something that's beyond that. There's a meaning there that I think that we explore. And I think it ultimately, why would what someone want to do, the put something that she created on you? Yeah, because it has a lot to do with identity contingency. And and I think that's generally what we're all kind of like trying to figure out. At least the first
Yeah,
phase of our life.
Yeah.
maybe when we hit the other phase, then we start working on the inner stuff, the stuff in which creates like the wholeness of who we are. But for the most part, most of us go on this journey of trying to figure out what our identity is, and the identity contingencies. That which, because
Hmm.
it's different in different contexts. Y'all are up in Canada, so you have this like kind of like Canadian Filipino thing, and then you're Igorot,
Multiculturalism. Yeah.
uh, and so there's a different culture for some of us in America, or wherever you grow up around the world. That's wherever you are planted in right now, that's going to be a deep part of who you are. If I grew up in Oakland, it would be all Oakland. But right now, I'm wearing San Francisco, Mission, because
What
that's
about
that's where I live, right?
what about
So that's
Mark?
what I have. And there you go.
It's
He's in the UK and he's got like San
look at the hat.
Francisco on him, wearing, Giants. There's no baseball happening right now, but hey, 3 world championships in 5 years. That's something to be proud of. Now, but wherever you are, you're gonna pick stuff up. It's like Igorot people, we've picked up a certain kind of brand of music. We have a love for country music. At least, like first generation folks have a great deep love for country music,
Mhm.
and that's something that, hey, was that given to us, or did we embrace it and took it as part of our identity because we identify with it, and it's something that kind of like resonates with who we are. What are the values encased with that? And so
Mm.
I think that life is complex already, and
Yeah.
as we become more
Yeah.
globalized people, we're truly looking at this complexity and taking bits and pieces of what is out there, the great diversity that's out there, and trying to own it in the wholeness of who we are. And how that
Yeah.
gets defined, usually it takes a while. We're always evolving, and that's kind of like the beauty of it. But I think
Mhm.
there's some authentic roots that we have to pay attention to. um and
Yeah.
and so, yeah, when you see that, I'd love for it to get to a deeper level. But sometimes, when we get too bent out of shape, when we see
Yeah.
culturally appropriated stuff, it's
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, you know what? Whose hypertension are we fueling? Theirs,
Yeah. Yeah.
certainly not.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
Mm.
yeah, me, yes, my own. And so we have to also be, cultivate that in a way. But
Yeah. No
also
doubt.
be
Sorry.
be vocal about it when we see that, hey, if there's something wrong, point it out. Or we
Mhm.
feel that, hey, that's not being that's not that's not being done correctly, respectfully, then, hey, we could point those things out
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think
in ways that people are
the
willing to
whole.
listen.
I think like one of the things that you're mentioning is those feelings of anger, and
Mm,
Jay was putting more thought into that, and I completely agree that, like, as long as you're in the search for truth, it's okay to be angry, because they're all kind of stages when you're searching for truth. Like, anger is just the
mm,
beginning, because usually there's a sense of shock, right? It's just like when the stages of loss, right? Anger is part of that. Well, anger is part of it because anger fuels change. Anger fuels that energy that can change things. The problem is when you're angry and you never get out of that stage. And I know a lot of people who are there, like they're full on activists, and they still get so pissed off, which is good, but they just stay in that pissed off mode,
Yeah.
and they don't transform it into the part where there needs to be
right.
some type of change in the consciousness that you really want to bring to others, right? I mean, what we're doing here, this podcast, is kind of like that transformation of the initial angers that we've had about stuff. And I think it's a great way to kind of like, this is one way you can transform it, is just this kind of discussion, this kind of dialogue. Because when I was talking about the Weesing thing, and this is in the 90s when I was in the university, yeah, I was pissed off, like, of course, you get pissed off about a lot of things when you're in that age range, right? Hormones and everything. But like, I was like, man, fuck this shit. You're making this stuff and just selling this at the Filipino festivals. You don't even know nothing about us, man. You can't wear that shit. You know what I'm saying? And I used to get pissed off about it, but then I started to realize, n- you know, this is like over time when I matured and my understanding of myself matured. I started to realize, well, all I can say is is what Jay said, like address what I feel and then go from there. It's up to them if they want. Hopefully they'll grow a sense of mindfulness, awareness to want to at least put some understanding or thought in what they're wearing, you know? Because even
I
us,
know.
because we were born abroad, we had to do that for ourselves as well, you know? What are
Right,
you
Our own
saying?
culture.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You think about that now. I think, dang, I wish I had like the wherewithal to monetize my own culture that way. Because look at that, they're making money off like my own
Yeah, people are
culture,
making
man.
money off
Oh my
our
lord.
stuff, man. Our
That's
Yeah.
stuff.
another
And
reason to
it's
get
like,
angry about appropriation is that monetization piece is it's I don't
and I
know.
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
Amanda brought it up in the IIC in Hawaii, and one was like people using Wang Ud's picture, and then like
Right.
putting it up in stores. Like I think was it the Nike store or something like that? Some shoe store
Mm.
had Wang Ud there, and it's like, dude, is Wang Ud even getting paid for that?
Mm.
You know?
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
think with that, I think it was somewhere there in Europe, and I'm pretty sure they didn't know. Nobody there from Kalinga knew that was being used or anything like that. And when we were in IAC, actually, because going around shopping and having and seeing Mahmoud's face on like coffee and things that they were selling, I'm like, is there a process of how they do this? Like, can they just use her face, like because they're in Kalinga, or how does it happen? But apparently, it goes through I don't know, some sort of governance committee or something over there to be approved within Kalinga at least, or probably within the Philippines as well. I'm not really sure about the rest of the world. It's hard to police
I mean,
that.
they
But
could have popped it off of Getty Images and paid the photographer. So I
yeah,
mean,
exactly.
yeah.
So
Well, hopefully the photographer. Then it's the photographer's responsibility, right? To
well,
well,
to
I think in
if
in,
she,
in that place, because all of that, the ownership of the actual image then becomes something. Um, it's almost like fair game. That's a hard one to kind of like really to try to
well, it's
try to
funny
get at. But I think that the
because
acknowledgement of where the image comes from and who that person is, I think that's kind of important. Would LeBron James love his
yeah.
image put on our coffee cups? If he had a tie to Igorotness, I mean, I I don't know.
well, that's a
But
thing. Like in trying to make money off of stock photography, which I've dabbled at, and it's
Mm.
difficult. There's a lot of things that go into that. They say if these things are like recognizable, people are recognizable, the places are recognizable. They, they don't really approve them, and they don't let them sell those images. So I don't really know how that worked.
And if we're talking about the
Yeah.
ownership of the picture itself, legally, it's within the
It's the
right of the
photographer.
photographer. Yeah. So
yeah,
it
yeah,
doesn't.
yeah.
Honestly,
their
at the end of the
image.
day, it doesn't really matter. Like if even if
Mm.
Apo Wang E didn't want that picture up on the ad or whatever, because the photographer took the picture, is within his own right. I mean,
Hey,
you
she
can.
might
Maybe it's
actually just
different from
enjoy the
country to
blessing of
country.
that, just having her image out there, and I mean, if it,
Yeah.
who knows what she really thinks about it, but I think that it would be. I know, like my grandmother, if she saw her images all over the place like that,
Oh yeah.
oh man, she would have
Like
loved it.
what the hell? From
She would
from
have
my
loved
friends,
it.
like what the
She
hell?
would have laughed. She would have just laughed and just thought it was absolutely
Yeah.
unimaginable that she would be, put on a massive billboard,
Yeah.
That's the
and
thing
put at the
about
Nike store.
Well, you know what? I think she would have asked for some money.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
True.
like the old ladies and the old men in Ifugao when you come down to Banawi, and it's like, hey, you can take my
Yeah,
picture.
get
Hey,
Right, exactly.
propina,
right?
get some tip.
I
And
mean,
from the,
Good
from the
point.
things I've
Good
heard
point.
about Abawang, she seems to like the attention from
Attention. Yeah. Yeah.
the foreigners and stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
she did sign
Mm.
off. I don't know. Maybe we don't have the whole
Maybe.
story.
Yeah.
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 But if
We
she
don't know.
didn't, yeah, that's another issue. So
Mm.
it's I don't know. That's interesting. And then
Yeah, it's an interesting topic.
yeah, in terms of appropriation as well, like